Welcome, everyone, to I've really been looking forward to this Voices with Vervaeke. I'm going to be talking with, and I'm introducing you to Elizabeth Oldfield. She had me on her show on the Sacred, I had such a wonderful, personally powerful interview and discussion with her. She really drew me out in a powerful way. We got into some very deep stuff, and I was very moved by it. And I've seen her on a couple other videos, conversations, very impressed. I asked Elizabeth for two things, two gifts, to send me a copy of her book and to come back on my show and talk about it. The book we're going to be talking about is her wonderful book, Fully Alive, which is a very interesting, it's very Augustinian. It's a mix of a kind of autobiographical confession and psycho-spiritual theological reflection. And so I'm putting you there in some very august company, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'll take that. Literally august company.
So yes. I'm going to introduce Elizabeth in a sec and let her tell her a little bit about herself. And what I thought we'd do, and I proposed to Elizabeth, is I'm going to pick out some parts of her book that really sang to me, really resonated, either like they called to me deeply or they provoked a question in me. The intent is I'll say how, what it evoked or provoked in me, share that with Elizabeth, give her a chance to respond, reflect, and hopefully we'll get into a good flowing dialogos. And so that's the intent. But first, Elizabeth, great welcome. Very much appreciate you coming. And why don't you just say a little bit about yourself? We're going to get into some of you because your book is autobiographical, but maybe just a little bit of framing you think might be helpful for some of my listeners who haven't met you before.
Gosh, how does one describe themselves? Well, I'm speaking to you from a very small... I've realized writing this book that the phrase intentional community is more jargon than I realized that it is. It doesn't actually make a lot of sense to everybody. So I'm using the phrase micro monastery, a small community of families that live together, drawing on monastic rhythms in South London in the UK. And I think the thread of my life has been being really interested in these questions of what is a good life? How do we live together well? How do we learn to love each other more? And what are the stories that culture is telling us that make that easier or harder? And theological questions have been woven through that. I've been in and out of faith and in all different kind of flavors. But those are my abiding questions. What does it mean to really live? What does it mean to grow in love? What does it mean to connect with each other? And I've done all kinds of jobs related to that, but that's the kind of underground river.
Well, thank you. That's very, very helpful. So I guess, as I said, I want to just pick up on a few things, and I want to pick up on, I guess the first thing, where it really struck me is, and I found kind of a simpatico between us, is you say at one point, so many people I speak to, and I take it you mean when you were writing or when you were doing your show, so many people I speak to crave places to belong and ways to settle their soul. And I thought, wow, that's right. Because for me, how that resonated with me is this sense of belonging, this sense of connectedness, meaning in life, relevance, realization. I do a lot of work on that. And then also this idea of, getting the various elements of the psyche, levels, kinds of knowing aligned. This is very Platonic, right? Inner justice, outer connection to reality, and they're reinforcing each other. So that's what landed with me. And I wonder how what I just said lands with you. Was that something you were noticing in general, that people are seeking? I mean, Plato proposed that there was these sort of two meta drives. We want this kind of inner fullness peace, and we want this fullness of contact, and not just an intellectual. We want to belong in some way. What do you think? What comes up for you when I say that?
Yes, that's beautiful. My knowledge of Platonic philosophy is patchy at best. And so the main thing is a longing to learn more and to understand the ways different wisdom traditions use language that often feel like they're trying to get to something similar, right? Something unspeakable, something beyond language. But certainly the thread that I've been pulling on is, what does it mean? I used the phrase to someone recently, and honestly, as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, that sounds so smug. But that we were talking about psychedelics and the psychedelics renaissance and what that might mean and the way it's changing the spiritual landscape. And she said, have you ever been tempted? And I said, well, sure, in a curious way, but I don't feel a need because I have a deep sense of existential satisfaction. And then I was like, that's check your existential satisfaction privilege. And I was like, it's true. Like, I need to be honest about that. And I wonder if that like internal coherence, that you use this lovely thing about different parts of our psyche lining up, that actually the very deepest part of ourselves I sometimes think of them as our very deepest values, the things we want to define our lives. We are conscious of them, for one thing. And then we are making choices around them. We are seeking to stay loyal to them rather than just sitting there thinking, actually, I'm not living the life I wanted to. I'm not paying attention to my soul. I'm not staying loyal to my values. And I'd love to hear more. I'm really interested in the way most wisdom traditions seem to have reached for language to indicate that there are different parts of us, right? You might think of the ego and the id. Superego, my tradition, it's the flesh and the spirit, or it actually is broken up in different ways in different parts of scripture, in different parts of my tradition. Is that what Plato's grasping towards, do you think there?
Well, there's two different, because Plato, there isn't one Plato, just like there's not one voice in the Bible, right? So one of the great mistakes that was predominant in academic philosophy and research on Plato for a long time, that has now been pretty much overturned, was this idea that there's a single voice of Plato and we can get a single theory out of it, that single voice. And we've largely come to realize, no, that's not how his philosophy works. But two of them are, and this one really prefigures Freud in major ways. There's sort of three centers in us. There's one he calls it a monster that's sort of in your abdomen, in your genitalia. And it works in terms of super salient, very present. It's in the present moment, super salient. It's very urgent. It works in terms of pain and pleasure.
And drives.
Then you have something, yes. And then you have this thing there's no real good translation for it. I'm sort of touching my heart area, but when I say heart, all kinds of romanticism rolls in that's not relevant or even important. So the Greek word thumos, it's kind of where our sociocultural emotions are, how we want to be connected to other people, recognized and valued by others. It's where we have things like pride and shame and admiration and envy. So it's working at this sort of social connectedness level. And then there's this, and he represents that with a lion-hearted, and where we get, courage, and lions are social animals. And then forgive the sexism, but compared to a lot of people, Plato was, very far ahead. He actually said women could be philosophers, they could be in the army, they could be they could be rulers of the state, right? But there's a man in your head, and that man can pursue long-term abstract goals, and they work in terms of truth. He works in terms of truth and falsity. And then he talks about, right, so they're working at these different scales and they have different goals. And his point, which is, I think, very well, and I think he develops better than Freud in some ways, because he talks about the cognitive dimensions of these things, is that each one of these has got pretty good sort of psychological, cognitive scientific evidence for it, that we have these different kinds of motivations. And then his point is, they often come in conflict with each other because they're working according to different criteria and at different scales. And then what part of what it is to be wise is to figure out the optimal relation. Each one seeks to be maximal, but the degree to which it's maximal, it damages the other two, right? And so you have to get a way of getting them all working as optimally together. And that's a fullness of life, because then everything is being as fully alive, to use your phrase, as it possibly can. And if you'll give me one more minute. And then the idea is that inner conflict is the driver, and this is where it overlaps with Freud, of a lot of our self-deception, of a lot of our projection, our defensiveness, our neurosis. And as we ameliorate that inner conflict, we start to cleanse the doors of perception and see more deeply into reality. As we see more deeply into reality, we get better at seeing more deeply into reality, and then we can better realize the real patterns of the psyche. We can align the psyche better. We can then see more deeply into reality. And this is the ascent out of the cave, this rolling, reciprocal opening that's going on. And Plato's idea is that is the way to mutually satisfy our two meta drives. Our two meta drives are, in addition to whatever satisfies our desire, we want the satisfaction of our desire to not create inner conflict and undermine our agency. We want it to lead to a peace, a fullness. And in addition to whatever satisfies our desires, we want what satisfies our desires to be real, not fake, not an illusion, not a fraud. And when we can when we get those two together, we get that sense of inner peace and connectedness to what's most real. And that's his proposal for human happiness.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to go away and chew on it.
Sorry, I didn't mean
No.
I didn't want to get into
No, it's really helpful because the sort of working thesis I have about sin, and again, this is pretty personal, just ponderings aloud rather than here and in the book. I'm not claiming a kind of closed thesis or one of the things I had to liberate myself actually from in order to be able to write was this desire that anything you say in this deep area you have to be completely certain of, and you need to approach it in this very academic fashion. And liberating myself honestly to sort of in Plato's language, to draw on wisdom from all of those, right? And to say, particularly this bit for me, connection is everything. Fully aliveness is everything. Relationship is everything. And it's not that we need to completely abandon, reason or the man in our head or whatever, but that the primacy of that post-Enlightenment, post-Reformation, the way we have disconnected, we have made wisdom subsumed under knowledge. And my scriptures are incredibly clear that wisdom is not the same thing as knowledge, that you can learn a bunch of facts and it puffs you up. Wisdom builds you and other people up. And so my kind of getting to the point of thinking, right, what do I think is getting in the way of my fully aliveness and the fully aliveness in the world? Why do we do what we do not want to do and not do what we do want to do? Why can we not tackle the climate crisis? Why do we not seem to be able to live together well? Why is tribalism, polarization exploding? What is it about humans, right? Given we are so beautiful and so tender and have so much potential for glory and goodness, what are we doing? And that deep sense of actually the tradition that was in the background in my childhood and that I had rejected once, that says sin, that this is what's tripping us up. And I was like, sin?
Yeah. Okay.
That is a concept.
I want to dig into sin.
It's unfashionable.
Well, I don't care. I think you're saying something really important. First of all, I agree wholeheartedly with the distinction between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is about overcoming ignorance. Wisdom is about overcoming foolishness. And those are different things. Ignorance is a lack of knowledge. Foolishness is a failure to grasp the proper significance of what you know and apply it appropriately.
Live it.
Yes, exactly. And that's where talking about different kinds of knowing and getting them aligned could be important. But let's not get into that right now. So I once proposed this definition, and I was trying to create a bridge, and I don't think it succeeded because I don't think anybody got it or they didn't seem to pick up on it. So I'm going to try again. Sorry, I'm making you a guinea pig here. I was trying to bridge between the theological language and this philosophical language around foolishness, where foolishness isn't just you do this thing. No, it's more like this system of self-deception that takes on a life of its own. And one of the papers I published with Leo Ferraro, we called it parasitic processing. It's this kind of thing that takes you over and narrows you down and narrows and flattens your world, and you get sort of locked in. Very much like the machinery that my friend Mark Lewis talks about with addiction. Your cognitive flexibility and your sense of who you could be diminishes, and the world shrinks, and they reciprocally narrow, which is the opposite. And here's the connection with love, because love is reciprocally opening, right? And so I said, and so if you can get to this notion of foolishness as kind of anti-love, I said, I wonder if we could understand sin as a failure to love wisely. I wonder what you think of that as a proposal. I know it's very Augustinian, but if you object, I'm happy to hear. But what do you think about that?
In my current working ponderings, love and sin are opposites. And so for me, fully aliveness is connection, is moving towards life, moving towards our own soul, moving towards each other, moving towards the earth, actually, and moving towards the divine.
Yes.
And it's the withdrawal and the disconnection that is the sort of blanket category for sin. Luther and Augustine use this phrase, homo inconvertus in se. No one knows how you pronounce it. That's how you pronounce that. Man or humanity turned in on ourselves, and the the sense of an ingrowing toenail. And so the idea that sin is love not applied wisely or foolishly, I'd have to sit with that a little bit, I think. For me, I haven't given much thought to foolishness, but what you're making me think about foolishness is, it's a real category in the book of Proverbs. It's spoken about a lot. The wise man and the foolish man, the wise man and the foolish man. And some of that's super
Jesus
pragmatic.
does too.
Yeah,
Jesus does too.
Yeah. And I guess for me, the sort of outworkings of what I've been grasping towards is that foolishness is a failure to understand that life is connection, that love is what draws us, that love is what defines us. And pride, as the sort of king sin, is the idea that we can manage without it, that we can manage without other people, that we are not relational, that we're not interconnected, that actually we are these solipsistic, autonomous, self-actualizing, self-creating. And so maybe there is some overlap because that's a withdrawal from love.
I think so. What I heard when you were doing the ingrown toenail is very much what, first of all, let's get the idea that the self is not a monad, that the self is not an Aristotelian substance, independently existing, possessing its properties and being the sole author of its behavior. Let's go to 4e cog sci and say the self is inherently dialogical, it's inherently relational. And then that inward turning is what we were trying to get at with this notion of reciprocal narrowing, right? Where I'm less and less tapping into the depth of myself and less tapping into the depth of the other. And that seems to me like the hardening of the heart also that's talked about. Yeah, right. And to me, I was trying to get at the idea that when we're not loving wisely, we have chosen to go into reciprocal narrowing and harden our heart. And the heart is what we're behind as we engage in the bullshit pretense of being autonomous substances, completely self-making and self-interpreting. That was what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant. I love that language of patterns because I'm obsessed with formation. This this interconnects with Oya McGilchrist's work about attention, and the hardening the heart thing came up for me because I was talking to someone about what is going on with these people having very spiritual experience on psychedelics and what is the role of attention and what is it that means that I feel able to have what certainly seem to be experiences of the divine in ways that people with a different temperament, formation, history than me would long for, but find really difficult.
Yes.
And whether these types of attention can, that they shape what we can see, right? They shape what's possible for us. They and that what did you call it? Reciprocal narrowing.
And reciprocal opening. Yeah.
And that when we try and live in ways, practices and rituals and themes and communities, crucially communities that mean that our formation is towards love, we will increasingly open to the world and open to reality and open to each other. And now I want to read that paper.
Okay. Well, thank you. So that notion of connectedness, I mean, this is what I do a lot of my actual scientific work on. The core of one of my central theses is that general intelligence, the kind of intelligence we demonstrate, and the kind that they're trying to make with artificial general intelligence, at the core of it is this ability. There's two things interlocked: anticipation. The more you can sort of anticipate the future, the more intelligence we attribute to an organism. But interlocked with that is the core problem, which is relevance realization. There's so much information available. It's astronomically vast. There's so much information in your memory and all the ways you could combine it. There's so many different sequences of behavior, sounds you could utter. There's so many logical possibilities you could consider. And the thing that you do, and this is kind of like Zen koan, is you're intelligent by ignoring almost all of that information. But you don't ignore it randomly, because if you ignore it randomly, you'd have an astronomical chance of doing the wrong thing. Somehow you zero in on the relevant information. And here's the thing: relevance isn't in me, and relevance isn't in the object. It's how the object and I are fitted together, how we belong together for a certain task. And it's not cold calculation, because it's what's grabbing my attention. It's what's arousing my affect. It's what's committing my agency. And so it's always bound up with care. So relevance realization is this this homing, and notice the word I'm using, homing in on something, a deep connectedness, a deep caring, a deep evolving involvement. And I use the Latin word religio to talk about that sense of connectedness. And then that's the first thesis. And I won't give you all the arguments and evidence for that. I've been doing that for like, I don't know, 25 years, making that argument. And tons of publications and other people publishing on that and all that. So I'm just going to take that. And so I think that's the core of our agency as intelligent beings. And I think it also plays a significant role in consciousness. We could get back to that if you wish. But then here's the second proposal, that religio, that sense of connectedness, so that's coming out of the part of psychology that's studying intelligence. One of the problems in psychology is the different parts don't talk to each other. That's why I'm a cognitive scientist. And then you have two other streams. You have people doing meaning in life and people doing the psychology of belonging, like Kelly Allen. Here's my proposal, that what the psychologists are talking about and measuring when they're measuring meaning in life is they're measuring that how much people have a celebrated sense of religio, of connectedness that is deeply relevant to them and affords them solving problems and using your language, forming their identity and their agency. And that's also what people are talking about in that sense of belonging in the belonging literature. And then if you don't have a sense of belonging, you're in trouble psychologically, socially, even physiologically. And I think all three of these converge on this sense of religio and that sense of connectedness. And the way you can sort of test for meaning in life, I think you and I might have talked about this, is you can ask people three questions. What do they want to exist even if they don't? How real is it? And how much of a difference do they make to it right now? The more answers you have to those questions, and the deeper you think your answers are, the more I will predict you say your life has meaning in life. What do you think about that as trying to unpack this? Because you do, and wonderfully so, you keep coming back, this sense of connectedness, this movement towards and opening up to, but also letting the world and letting other people into oneself. Like this seems to me to be exactly what you're talking about. And this scientific literature would plug into that, I think, very readily.
I mean, it makes so much sense to me on such a deep level. And it is essentially what I think most of theology is about, which makes sense if you believe that we are made in the image of a God who is relationship in and of God's self, right? If you believe in the Trinity.
Oh, I want to talk to you about that. Okay. We're going to talk about that. That's great. I think that's amazing.
The other real thread that I pull on a lot is Martin Buber and I, thou, and the phrase that he uses about when we see, and I'd say 2/3 of I, thou, the very short book is about moments between us and other people, and the last third is about moments between us and the divine, us and God. But he says the moments of religio, you could, I think, replace that when we turn and other people stop being objects to us, or symbols, or ciphers, or just collections of like pattern recognition predictions, what we already know about them, we put out into the world, and we don't really need to take the cognitive time people do what we expect them to do. The moments where we cut through that and we really see them, and we see them as a you, and we're taking in new information, we're seeing them. That is all that is really real. That is living. That is life. That is fully aliveness. That's it. That's everything. That's the game. And in another book of his, he writes about how we spend a huge amount of time in different disciplines thinking about the individual self, which neither you or I really believe in. But, on all different disciplines, health and psychology and sociology and politics. And then we spend a lot of time thinking about ourselves as groups, as like, in sociology, how do groups work? How do they interrelate? How do we interdefine? But there's a third category, which is the between.
Yes, exactly. The between,
the religio. And it's so hard it's so intangible. It's so difficult to talk about. And so the idea, I didn't know your thesis on this. I didn't know there was a whole scientific attempt. I know that there's some work being done in philosophy on it, but that awareness that the thing that's hard to talk about might be the really real, like might be the ball game, is very exciting to me.
So, and this is an idea from what's called 4 ecogs I. But I've coined a term. I talk about the religio as neither subjective nor objective, but transjective. It's exactly the between.
Don't know what that means.
Well, it's a new
Okay,
term. What it means is it's beyond and between the subjective and objective. It's what binds the subjective and objective together so that meaning and truth are possible. Because neither subjectivity or objectivity will give you meaning nor truth, because meaning or truth are inherently relational in nature. And then you can bind together meaning, religio, and truth in a powerful way. Let me show you what you're talking about. So I want to take the Buber, and I agree with you. I Thou, I think, is a very central book. Talked quite a bit in other places about Buber, but I want to then shift to a Murdoch example that John Wright talks about. Murdoch talks about the mother-in-law who has this daughter-in-law that she regards as really kind of coarse and rude and a little bit disorganized. And then one day she has this realization, and notice the word I just used. She has this realization that, wait, maybe her daughter is spontaneous and grounded and really authentic. And maybe she's been understanding, things, these phenomena in exactly the wrong way. So notice she's getting an insight that's going in both directions. And here's that opening. She's getting an insight into who this person might be beyond all of her patterned predictions. But she's also realizing that her way of framing it, that way of doing this, was also problematic, and she needs to unlock the two together. And Wright calls that sensibility transcendence. And what I'm trying to get you to note is what's happening there is this reciprocal opening of the relevance realization machinery. It's like it's an insight. It's like, oh, I was seeing this in the wrong way. I was considering the wrong things. I was ignoring the wrong things. And the way I was framing it, the way I was homing in on it was wrong. And I have to open both up together. And we get a sense, like you said, and then I want to drill down on another one of your quotes. We get a sense of the really real. And that's where I want to pause, because you said that, right? And then we use realization. And it's this betweenness, and that's the really real. And I want to talk about your first, is that fair, conversion? I don't know what language is not offensive, but you talk about, I believe you're at a camp or something, and you talk about it, and let me try and see if I can quickly find the actual quote, because I thought it was really wonderful. You talk about having an ecstatic experience. You quote Murdoch and the unselfing that I was just referring to. So that's, and you talk about it as terms of, here, my question had been answered with an overwhelming felt presence. An encounter with a you, which you put in scare quotes, which means don't use that word the way we typically use it, defined by love and acceptance and peace. And you also go on to talk about my life had acquired another dimension. So reality is opening up. This is a real for you. It's a realization. It's a transformative realization. And it's this sense of a felt presence that, right, is something like, but not the same as what we are normally capturing by you. And this is wonderful. And I want you to unpack that a little bit more if you can. And I know, and we're both smiling, and I appreciate your smile. I'm not expecting you to be Thomas Aquinas here or anything like that, nor am I expecting that I would be that. But what I want is I just want to play with you about this, like real serious, good faith play around these things are all coming together. This sense of the really real, the betweenness, the loveness, the love, the connectedness, presence. And you're not talking about, the presence of a determinate thing. Buber's very clear about that, right? And you want to say this is in the second person. It's not the first person subjective. It's not the third person objective. It's the second person, right? Transjective, if you'll allow me my neologism. And you're playing with all of this. And I think this is all resonant with what we've talked about so far. But just more, say more. Like, can you go back on that? Because like that is so Like this, because and later on, and when you're talking about God, you talk about God more adverbial. You talk about God as a way of paying attention, right? Which is really, really interesting. Much more relational, much more adverbial, rather than the properties of a thing. It's a way in which there's a presencing, if I can put it that way. That seemed to be fair to how you're talking.
Yeah.
And and the reason, so part of this is selfish on my part. Part of it, I'm doing a lot of work on this. There's a book out, I can't remember it, called Presence right now, on some of the cogsi about a felt sense of presence. And we can sort of induce a little bit of it in the labs, which doesn't mean it's an illusion, because we can make you see a car when there's no car, and that doesn't mean cars are an illusion, right? That's a bad argument. But right. So part of me is the selfish scientist. I really want to, somebody like you.
I'll give you some data.
Well, give me some data, but I promise you, I'm going to really listen also as a you, right? I'm going to listen because I care about this also as a person, right? Because I think, right, think about it. Wisdom is about this loving enhancement of our connectedness, of our ability. The wise person can go into a complex, messy, ill-defined situation and home in on what's relevant, summon their agency in the right way so that they are properly responsible. And so there's a connection between the realization of this and the ability to be wise. Sorry, I'm talking too much because I'm enthusiastic. I'm going to shut up and open a space for you. Go.
I love it. Thank you. No, it is it's a tender and powerful invitation. And as you know, sort of when I approach with fear and trembling, and the bit in the book where I try and address it directly it's like 4 paragraphs of explaining why this is hard before
yes.
There. So what we're talking about in the sort of my most simple and familiar language is God, which I sometimes use the synonym of love for with a capital L. And that experience, even though I've written about it in the book, I'm currently trying to write about it again for someone who is fascinated by an essay for them, and they're like, I know you say words can't get at it, but will you try? Like, will you go more? Will you go deeper? And so I'm really reaching for.
I want to help you. Right?
The edges, the edges of language with it, and the things that come up for me are just the undeniability of that moment of encounter, and how impossible it is. Because honestly, like, I can close my eyes now and know myself seen, and the deep knowing of the presence of love in my life, and the way that every other moment of love and encounter and intimacy and reflection reflects that is the ground of my being, in Kierkegaard's understanding of it. And in that moment, it was really like night and day. It was, people had been theorizing about God around me, and I'd been a bit interested and questioning and being like, maybe I do believe, maybe I don't believe, asking loads of hard questions of this youth group that I randomly ended up in through a friend, and then at this festival that I randomly ended up in because I fancied some of the boys. Not from a particularly Christian family at all. Like, it wasn't a big deal in my childhood. I didn't have it shaping my imaginative world as a child in a way that lots of people did, for good or ill. I know that was complex for you, but it went from a theory to a reality. In that moment, I asked a direct question and received a direct answer. And, the other thing that gets close to it, and I quote, is Pascal's, what's known as the Night of Fire, when he says, not the God of the philosophers or the scholars. Our attempts to tame and theorize and analyze just get like, and you're left with, he says, fire, 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 joy, 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 And as I've gone back to it and I feel there's a chapter in the book on sex, and writing about sex felt less intimate and vulnerable than trying to write about this moment.
Yes.
Because it feels so holy and personal. But one way I've been thinking about it is when I had my babies, when I met my babies for the first time, and it was this weird mix of surprise and deep recognition.
Surprise and recognition. Excellent. That's
like, hello, of course it's you. Also, who are you? I know you. I don't know you. Who are you? You're so here. And honestly,
and
like
that I want to make sure I'm getting the connection. Sorry for interrupting. Don't lose your
please
flow.
do.
That moment of, let's call it like encounter. It's almost like Platonic anamnesis. You remembered something you didn't know you had in you. Like Plato talks about this weird kind of remembering where, like when we're doing the dialogical practices with people, they'll often say, I discovered a form of intimacy that I did not know about, but I've always been looking for. That kind of weird, right? Okay. So that's landing. Good. So, and are you saying that obviously, and also you're experiencing a particular kind of love. You're experiencing the prototypical instance of agapic love. You're not loving this person because you want to consume them. They're consumable. You're not loving them because they're a great friend and you've had a life together. You're loving them because you're caught up in the process of, there's a person that I'm going to participate in the creation of, which is like analogous to God creating persons, something like that. The Bible uses that metaphor. And am I understanding you correctly? You're using and saying that intimate remembering of and surprise when I encountered my babies is a close analogy to that sense of God. I'm trying to get make sure I'm not connecting it inappropriately.
No. I mean, the thing about this is every time I go, okay, it's like this. I'm like, yes, but it's also not like that. It is.
Yeah, of course.
It's all these. It is literally a space beyond language, and so the poetry gets closest, music gets closest. Like, and it really helped me. I was reading. I think Mike McHargue was. And this may be one of those bullshit studies, so forgive me. I did not go check my references or look at the, rigorous.
That's okay.
How seriously it had been peer reviewed. But in some ways, it's a metaphor. But he was saying when researchers are trying to do fMRI scanning on people in sort of deep ecstatic states or deep prayer, deep contemplative prayer, particularly nuns that have prayed for a long, long, long time. But other type ecstatic states, akin to the kind of ones that I have, the language center of the brain is just quiet.
Yep.
Nothing is
happening.
And the
default mode network goes down too.
Right.
Which is your sense of self, which is why you get that unselfing experience.
Interesting.
That is fairly good evidence, by the way.
Great.
It's not bad evidence.
Great. Wouldn't want to be quoting bullshit science. But it really helped me because I'm a writer, right? This is my thing. I love words. The feeling like my sentences were like ricocheting off this memory and there was something almost dishonorable about attempting to capture it. I both want to because I so want to share this.
Yeah.
It's the treasure. But also it is so personal. And it's where I don't believe in individuals, but I do believe in persons. And I do believe in human particularity. And who knows what the soul is, but it's the closest language I've got for the particular me that has connection with, religio with, encounter with, I, thou with divine love. And that it has to be particular. It has to be personal to be the really real.
I think that's right. I want to pick up, first of all, I think you know this, you're safe here to talk to me. I'm not gunning for anything.
I know, I do feel that.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Secondly, I've had several of these kinds of experiences in my life. And I also have practices that are designed and succeed in bringing me into a more reliable conformity to that realization of the really real. So this is something I think we deeply share. I think there's a couple of things that are reverberating. One is this agape and the great, the great statement in the Epistle of John, right? God is agape. It's this God. This is an identity claim, which we don't get very many of the Bible. And the identity claims, there's basically four, and they're all inherently relational. God is love, agapic love. God is light, which is also relational. You don't see light, you see by means of light and the way it creates relations of intelligibility between things. God is the logos, and logos doesn't mean just word. And we tend to reduce logos to logic, but logos means this, what you're trying to get at, this ground of intelligibility, right? And of course, God is also life, right? And it's right, and life is inherently relational too. And I wanted to, so we've got this, right? And yeah, I think persons are inherently relational things rather than substantial things. And there's something particular about them. The Buddhists have this term suchness. Everything actually has its suchness in some ways. It's absolute, like, because any words I use to talk about this are categorical, and they don't pick up on the suchness of this, the way it's different from all the other things in the category. And then there's also a moreness, that suchness is somehow non-logically identical with all of the relations and connections that it bears. And I think persons are a particular kind of nexus there. And I wonder if you find that language helpful. This surprise and recognition. I like Plato talks about this a lot. This is how we recognize the forms. We go, and then we go, but of course, right? It's that simultaneous, like, and it's like, and beauty is that combination. This is why beauty is so important to Plato. Beauty is a combination of surprise, but yet, right, of course, yes. Why didn't I see it that way before? Yeah, exactly. And so that is all background, and I didn't try to thread it as a premise by premise argument. I was just laying it out as, okay. Yeah. Because this is the thing that, and I mentioned logos and light because they bring out that, yes, we don't see the light, and there's nothing in terms of which we can understand the logos. The Neoplatonists talk about the one is that by which you understand everything, but it's nothing. You can't conceive of the one because you can't put it outside of it in order to conceive of it as an object, because it permeates. Like you keep trying to step out and looking, and it's already behind you, right?
Yeah.
As you're trying, right, making it possible for you to
live and move and have our being in.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and I get the reverence, right? The deep care, because the importance, notice the heightening of religio, the deep care and the importance of this. And so I'm not trying to trespass on your reverence, but the question is like this. The thing that I'm driving at, maybe it's even it's a quest maybe, but it doesn't mean that there is any disconnect from all of that intelligibility and that ground of intelligibility. The fact that the words don't capture it doesn't mean that there is this gap or space. In fact, it reaches into the words, it permeates them, it grounds them, right? And it's loving in that sense. It embraces them, it affords them, it makes them possible. It is the inexhaustible fount of flowing intelligibility. And so, and the reason why I get at it's that connection. That's why we have the weirdness of the connection, I think, because the surprise is I can't capture it. But of course is, but it's intimately interwoven with all of my sense making, all of the light of my world, all of the logos of my world. And for me, that's what I'm trying to, and you can see now I'm doing the same thing. I'm struggling. I'm doing things with my hands.
Words.
Yes, exactly. But I'm trying to take a baby step here, but does that land for you what I was trying to get at? Because part of what I want to challenge and push against is people who think what we're doing is a kind of, a kind, I don't know, something like a mystification, a kind of fundamental, right, otherness. It is, but it's, and you quote Williams about this, but it's also, as he points, it's an otherness that somehow embraces us, right, and it isn't even competing with us, not one iota. And
Yes.
I'm trying to get that the surprise and the recognition are sort of the two sides of this, right? The ineffable, but that is also nevertheless sourcing all of our intelligibility. Sorry, that was a lot. But my question is, does that resonate with you? Does that sing true to how your experiences are?
I think so. I'm not sure if I've understood you, but the things it's making me think about are how that experience and the experiences that I have now felt like the cultural scripts around them were irrational, right? That they were sort of, yeah, that my identity, I worked at the BBC for 5 years. I ran a think tank in Westminster. I have 2 degrees. I'm a feminist. I'm sort of sickeningly metropolitan intelligentsia, at least in this aspiration. I read the New Yorker, right? And so that... seriously, it's disgusting. That self-making of my formation, smart girl at school, jump the academic hoops. And honestly, when I was young, there was like 2 paths. You can either be the hot girl or the smart girl. I was like, I'm going to be the smart girl. That's who I am. And
well,
the reason my first...
that's surprising. You're quite a beautiful woman. I mean, I'm
thank
surprised.
You.
Okay.
Teenagers, weird.
Okay.
When you're thinking about the self that we make from the messages we get from the culture around us, intelligent became one of my things I wanted people to perceive me as. And it's very left hemispheric, actually very male, disembodied, increasingly science leaning, not humanities leaning, that kind of, okay, in order to be respectable, in order to be impressive, in order to connect with the kind of people I'm interested in the world of ideas and the books, this bit of me that like lay flat on the floor weeping at the feet of Jesus when I was 15, I couldn't hold those 2 things together. And so it fell apart. And the bit the things that we can't talk about, the emotional, experiential encounter of the really real, I didn't have categories for, and no one around me had categories for. And the kind of person I was wanting to be becoming required me to let it go. And I think part of what the sort of quest I'm on is to push back against that and say, and I think your work and McGilchrist's work and a bunch of other people in the last 5 years to go expand our understanding of what intelligence is, expand our understanding of how we access the real, of how we perceive the world, of what wisdom might mean. And it, like, honestly, I'm full circle. I'm back like waving my praise flag, praying in tongues. And a part of my brain's like, what are you doing? And starts doing the, like, all the theories, all the psychology, all the crowd dynamics, all the credulity, my friends who take psychedelics have these experiences, it's just induced, all these things, like some of that's going on in my brain. But this bit, you talked about this, like the middle bit in the Plato thing, what I would call my soul,
yeah.
is like, I need this. The is it Pascal again? I'm obsessed with Pascal. Like Pascal would be my boyfriend if he was alive now. He said, "The heart has reasons, reason knows not."
Yeah.
And I'm like,
and he talked about the difference between the spirit of geometry and the spirit of finesse, which prefigures Ian's work. I just saw Ian a couple of weeks ago. We were at a conference celebrating his work together, and he and I have had several conversations together. So I think we share that project. Let me just say, for example, there's a paper first authored by Johannes Jaeger, but I'm also a co-author on it with some other people. And we're in third round of revisions. We had 2 reviewers, and we went through all their edits. We were ready to go. And then the third reviewer, out of the blue, finally sends in the review. And we have to start the whole process over again, which is, yes, those are some of the yuckiness of the academic world. But I'm very confident we're going to get it published. And basically, and I presented this argument directly to Ian, like he was literally 4 feet away from me facing him, and he liked it. But it's around the fact that, so logic is an example of a formal system. Math is an example of a formal system. I mean, like it's completely self-contained, rule defining, and there's Gödelian problems with it. And so remember that, but that's what a formal system is. And the proposal is that's what the left hemisphere likes. The left hemisphere likes to use formal systems to solve well-defined problems like math problems and logical problems, in which you have a very good representation of what matters. It's all packaged for you there by the formal system. Now here, and that would be the spirit of geometry in Pascal. But the process of formalization, of creating a formal system, which uses relevance realization, is not itself something that can be done by a formal system. The process that makes formal systems is not itself something done by a formal system. It is done by something that is dealing with messy, ill-defined, flowing problems that require this very careful trading off between complex dynamics in a flowing dynamic gestalt. And that's what Pascal means by the spirit of finesse. And what my work is trying to show is that intelligence isn't primarily a formal system. It's about the ability to make, and then once they're made, use formal systems. And not that I'm trying to map everything onto the left and right, because that can get very dangerous. But think about this. It's like, here's what can't be captured in any kind of formal system, but nevertheless, it makes possible and is constantly shaping the possibility space for any formal system. And so the two are deeply interpenetrating. And I'm trying to say something like that. See, I'm trying to sorry, this is audacious because I also respect Pascal the way you do. But I'm trying to say it's not just there's two. There's a deep religio between them. Finesse actually makes possible and fuels the spirit of geometry.
Yeah. It makes sense. And I think resisting our temptation to swing too far back the other way. Okay, we've had too much of this. Bad. Let's have this different type of attention, this different kind of world. Again, if we think everything is about connection, if we think everything is about relationship, everything is about interdependence, then it's leaving those competitive instincts in us, right? That are like, my way is right, so your way must be wrong. Or maybe we need each other. Maybe we need the spirit of geometry and the spirit of finesse, and they are designed to work together. The imagery in my scriptures is of a body, right? And the church is not always great at living this. UK church right now, struggling with this. But, the head cannot say to the foot, I do not need you. The arm, that when we are threatened, when we don't have a stable sense of self, when we do not know ourselves to be beloved, the Rowan Williams talks about this in relation to God, like that there's a relief sitting in the presence of the divine because it's not constantly negotiating its identity in the way that we are. And the more I know that which is not constantly negotiating, God's not constantly negotiating God's identity. And in the presence of the divine, I no longer have to either. Just loved. I'm a mess. I'm loved. Then I can go into the world and encounter other messy people who are loved, who are presenting a completely different spirit from me, function in the world completely differently. Naturally might threaten me because they don't care or they don't understand about the kind of things that we do or this instincts in us. But I can kind of have an open heart to that and go, tell me more. That's interesting. What can we learn from each other? And that's soul work for me. That's like long, slow, steady muscle building of resisting the temptation to see everything in competition with each other.
Thank you for watching. This YouTube and podcast series is by the Vervaeke Foundation, which in addition to supporting my work, also offers courses, practices, workshops, and other projects dedicated to responding to the meaning crisis. If you would like to support this work, please consider joining our Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. Okay, that's beautiful, and that's a connection. And let me try and make a connection with some of my current work, and what that other people are doing on. Okay, so again, we think of logical as, and this is Descartes, monological. What you do is the individual person running an argument, and of course, subject predicate logic, and that's where we get our substance property ontology, and it's all bound together in this wonderful package. The problem is that we now have increasing evidence, growing rapidly, that we actually reason better together dialogically than we do individually monologically. Take standard reasoning tasks, an individual does them, and the success rate's like 10%. You replace that with 4 people who they have to dialogue with each other, or what I call dialogos. They have to do this shared group agency and mutual correctedness. But if they do that, they get that success rate goes up to 82%.
Wow. I mean, the finding doesn't surprise me. The stat does. That's amazing.
It is impressive. Sperber and Mercier have done some of the important work on this, but more and more people are showing this. So, and this, of course, is part of why Plato, and this always frustrated people. Well, why doesn't Plato just write his arguments? Because Plato is trying to show, because you have to show this, right, that we reason best dialogically, not monologically. Right? Now think about that. Think about how there has to be something that makes the dialogos possible. And what you're talking about, if I understand you correctly, is you have a sensed participation in this presence that allows you to enter into and make possible a dialogical mode with others that actually is ultimately more reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. That we are made in the image of a God who is relationship, right? Even in the heart of the divine, there's no monologue. There's no monad.
Okay, so so I'm going to invite you right now to come back. We got to talk a lot more if you want. Okay, so I'm doing a course, Ultimate Reality, God and Beyond. Don't be put off by the title. I'm trying to explore thinkers who are getting beyond the monological substance, subject predicate logic model of God, which I think has become predominant. And one of the things that I think is really strangling sort of current theism. But James Filler's astonishing book, Heidegger, Neoplatonism, and the History of Being, he makes an argument that Neoplatonists were actually trying to argue that ultimate reality is pure relationality. Information is purely relational. Quantum entanglement is purely relational. Relativity is purely relational. Intelligibility is purely relational. You can get things out of relations, but you can't get relations out of things. That's why we had the collapse of nominalism and all those problems. It's an astonishingly brilliant book. And then he makes the argument that Christian Neoplatonism is actually a kind of apogee, because Christian Neoplatonism says, yes, and our sacred appreciation, and I'm trying to use that word in all of its meanings, our sacred appreciation of ultimate reality is very well captured in the image, in an imaginal sense of an image, the image of the Trinity. Like you said, God is not a monologue. God is an inherently dialogical. All of the persons are inherently relational in their nature, and they're bound together. And the identity claims of God are relational, logos, love. And he's saying people don't get this, although he says, I suppose this is shameless advertising for my friend Bishop Maximus, because Eastern Orthodoxy is very much more awake and alive to these thinkers, the Cappadocian Fathers, Dionysius, people like this, Maximus, obviously. That, right, people don't get this because they're still trying to understand this presence, this pure relationality, this you that isn't bound to a specific thing, but somehow is the you of all youing. I don't know if that even means anything, but that's how I sort of understand it. And that they're trying to grasp that with the subject predicate logic, and then they're trying to grasp it with substance, property, ontology, and therefore the only way they misunderstand it is they think, well, it must be a super substance, a super thing that owns and is the author of all things and all properties between them. And I think, and you may push back against me on this, and that's fine, but I think this is an important thing that is happening right now. I think there's an advent of the sacred going on, both within, I think people are groping towards that anamnesis of this understanding that we once had in Christianity, I will put it that way, Neoplatonic Christianity. And they're finding, not unsurprisingly, that it is deeply resonant with aspects of Zen Buddhism or Taoism, where the same language is being used in powerful ways. And you very clearly state in the book that you're open to learning from other traditions beyond Christianity. I understand Christianity is your home, and I'm not trying to take you from it. But so I've sort of laid my heart and my thought on the table about, like, and I know you're not doing this, so I'm not attributing to this to you. I think saying God is love, that ultimate reality is ultimately relational, is way, two more ways, way more radical than people realize. It is a profound challenge to our default way of thinking, of interacting, of determining what's real, of sensing. It's sorry. Now I fall into aporia. And I'm wondering if that lands with you.
Yes. Yes, it does. Because the word love has been worn out by overuse, right?
Oh, yeah. And trivialization.
Yeah. So I talk about sin in the book, quoting Francis Spufford, who, forgive me, I'm going to swear for listeners with sensitive ears, but I think it's important. He calls it the human propensity to fuck things up.
Oh, I think that's excellent.
The brutality of it really helps me. And when I interviewed him, I said, I need you to do the same thing for love. I need you to take this word, which is everything, and help us hear it again, because we can't hear it. And it slides past our consciousness and it goes in one ear and out the other. And to say God is love, reality is relational, all living is meeting, everything is relationship. It's not strong enough. It's not radical enough. It's not profound enough to, and this is the key for me, to make us change our behavior, to make us change our orientation and our heart posture. It might make some people go, interesting ideas, interesting theories.
Isn't that cute?
Lovely,
right?
Nice. Yeah. Honestly, and I'm going to sound more like a Pentecostal preacher than I usually do. But if it doesn't fundamentally in some way drive you to your knees, drive you into worship of some kind, into a seeking after an encounter with that love, then that's just like head knowledge.
Yeah. I think that was beautiful. You're pointing back to Pascal's fire, right? If it doesn't have that fire, right, then the problem is, other people have written about this, perhaps better than I, but we've trivialized love to being a feeling. Love isn't a feeling. That's ridiculous. And then people think, but love is an emotion, and love isn't an emotion. I love my partner profoundly, and that sometimes makes me happy. It sometimes makes me sad. I miss her right now. Sometimes makes me angry if somebody is insulting her, and I want to, because there is a function of emotion, of the emotion of anger, just to protect those things you genuinely value if they're threatened, right? And you realize, all of those are expressions of love. All of those emotions are expressions of love. So love isn't an emotion. Love is an existential stance. It's a way of being. It's a way of participating in the identity of something or someone else and allowing them to participate in yours. It's a religio. It's a binding that reciprocally opens. And then if you say, okay, that's good. And then you say, but think, maybe reality is a binding that reciprocally opens. And maybe that's why our minds evolved to try and focus in on this as a fundamental thing. Maybe that's the logos of the ontos, the ontology, the ontologos, and our psyche logos is actually evolved to be able to track and conform to that. And that experience, the one where we experience that most, is in the experience of love, understood in this wise way, not in as a feeling, or not as not as infatuation, not as desire. You can, like, you this is one of the most important tests for the longevity of love. Do you love someone even when you don't desire them? That's an important question to ask yourself. And when you get a clear answer to that is, yes, I do, then you go, oh, right. Love isn't right. Love can express itself in desire. Hopefully so. Love can express itself in all these, but love is behind them all. And it's because we have such a shallow notion of love that we find it so hard to believe that people could say ultimate reality is love. Well, that's a very pleasant metaphor. No, right? You really open up what that is, and then that opens you up to reality in a profound way.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that the sort of conflation of romance with love is non-erotic loves are as much the really real, like deep friendship. We have devalued it. Parent-child, like those loves are as much the route to wisdom and growth and fully aliveness as sexual love is, and we just have devalued them. But honestly, John, the thing that's making me think of, and I'm sort of surprising myself by going here, is that in my tradition, the symbol of love is a torture instrument, right? It is the he opened his arms of love upon the cross. That's another thing that keeps me on my tradition, that it resists abstraction. It resists generalization to the point of no bite through the incarnation and the crucifixion and the resurrection. And the no greater love has anyone than this, that they would lay down their life for their friends. And that is what I think is the Greek words that it's used is kenosis, self-emptying.
Yes.
That actually the love as opposite of pride, love as opposite of withdrawal into ourselves, as the toenail turned in ourselves, but like outward to the point that we might even lay down our lives. We might even empty ourselves. And that has been done for us is like gritty, dirty, bloody, painful, not fluffy. You are not going to draw a Valentine's card about it, right? It's just two completely different things.
That's a very good point. The cross prevents the Valentine's Hallmark carding of love. That's a very good argument. I like that. I don't know if you're aware of it. I think it's John Cobb, the Christian theologian, has an anthology. I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it, called The Self-Emptying God, because there's this ongoing discussion between Buddhists from the Kyoto school, like Maso Abe, and there's Jewish theologians and Christian theologians all talking about this notion of the self-emptying God, and how each one of their traditions says this is something very, very central that has been lost. And they find that obviously they don't all agree, because there's no sort of mush religion that everything will dissolve into or anything ridiculous like that. But they do all seem to be converging, at least on, we all want to talk about this and make this more prominent again. This notion, I think, of kenosis and the connections between kenosis and theosis, especially in the Eastern Orthodox, because if you hear theosis, divination, right, the Eastern Orthodox idea.
Divination as being coming like God, not as in the lesson in Harry Potter.
Yes, exactly. But
it's more my level of references, frankly, John.
Well, the idea is, but you become, it's not inflationary, because the theosis is interwoven with the most extreme form of kenosis. Yes, you can be godlike. And you know what you have to do? You have to do the most radical self-emptying to participate in God, right? And I think you're saying, the
first shall be last.
Yes. And I do think there's something important about this. And I mean, what's coming up for me now is Hahn, in his book Saving Beauty, talks about the reduction of beauty. We've taken the shock out of beauty, right? And so I'm going to say something that I think an ancient would get, but a modern person would find repellent. I think the crucifixion is beautiful, not because it's pleasant or pleasing. Hahn talks about how we've reduced beauty to the smooth, the easily gratifying, the easily graspable. But if you read Plato and Plotinus, or read even Rilke, beauty is an angel that could kill us but decides not to. Like, come on, think of that language, right? That's again the profound shock of it. But you did this thing. It's the shock that immediately you go, but of course, because if I didn't have that shock, it wouldn't awaken me to what love really is. And then that is what I mean by saying this is so I'm saying it's not only that we've trivialized love, we've trivialized beauty, and those two things, those trivializations in some sort of have a complicit, right? Mutually reinforcing fashion that traps us. And I think the epitome of that is pornography, because pornography is the reduction of love and the reduction of beauty to the smooth. And Han has a very good book on that, The Agony of Eros. You seem to be nodding when is that also resonating with you?
I mean, so much of that is resonating with me. I just can't order my many thoughts. The first one was about beauty as, obviously Aquinas talks about goodness, truth, and beauty as one way of thinking about God. And we hear the beauty bit and are like, pretty, like nice. And Kant has a work on aesthetics, which is the only bit of Kant I know, to be clear. And his thinking about the sublime and the numinous is that, like, actually it's quite scary. It's the bit. It's when we encounter it's when we encounter something that could kill us and does not. And the way I think about it is that it sort of makes us feel right-sized. That part of the agony of being a 21st century of human is that we are trying to be something we are not. Like, we are trying, like, relevance, whatever it was, that there's just so much. There's so much, and we're supposed to create ourselves. We're supposed to decide. We're supposed to know everything. We're supposed to be across all these references. We're supposed to have read everything. We're supposed to be thin and successful, and we're supposed to save the world from climate change. And we're also just like, we are not gods. We are not. Yuval Noah Harari is wrong. we are. There is that is beyond us. And when we encounter, I think the real divine, the real God of love beyond us, yes, it's quite scary because we feel our smallness and we feel our vulnerability and we feel our fragility. And I think we feel our sin. We feel our disconnection. We feel all the ways we have not lived up to the kind of people that our soul longs us to be. But it is also sort of a relief because then we're right-sized and we know where we are. The thing about porn is that was the scariest part to write, because I am basically trying to make quite a full-throated defense of the Christian sexual ethic from a feminist perspective and say, yes, I know that this church teaching around sin has been used as a cosh to beat people, gay people and women in particular. However, it, at its heart, I think, is about a refusal to treat another human being as an object, and a very, very high attunement to power imbalances. And my argument against porn comes down to the disconnecting formation of treating another person like an object.
Totally. I think that. So there's a couple things that come up for me. There's all this scientific work going on in awe right now. I'm involved in it. We're running an experiment. Some of the work that's come out of it that seems pretty reliable, Keltner and Jennifer Steller here at the University of Toronto, is awe does that proper proportion. Awe is, and think how it does relate to our word awful, right? But awe is, people reliably report a shrinking of the self. But one of the interesting things about awe is now if you push it too far, that becomes horrific, because if the shrinking goes too far, you get horror. Right, but awe is it is one of the few experiences where the self shrinks and people experience it positively. It's not shame, right? It's not depression. There's shrinking, but it's positive. And this is Murdoch. Love is the painful recognition that something other than yourself is real. I propose, it is a hypothesis, that unselfing actually makes us realize a possible connection to reality that we always longed for but didn't know. that we were longing for it. And that's why, although the self shrinks, we get something positive. Now, for me, and this is where I'm putting on my cognitive scientist hat, but I'm going to also put on my Plato hat. The thing about that is, like, you can imagine, right? You can imagine that there's two sins. Plato was worried about two things. Drew Hyland's book on finite transcendence, that Plato was always trying to get us to get that we are always finite, and that means finitude, fallible, right? But we are also open to transcendence. And he says, if we just fall into our finitude, we can fall into despair. We can fall into horror, right? We can lose a sense of the proper dignity of a person. We could just, right? So we have to also realize that we are responsible to transcendence. But if we just identify with the transcendent pole, then we suffer hubris and inflation. And he says what you have to do is you have to have a tonos. You have to get this proper proportioning, proper sizing. But I'm trying to change it from size to, I'm not trying to change it. I'm trying to amplify your sizing to making it inherently relational. It's a sizing that puts you in relationship, right position, like the right holding together of, right, your finitude and your transcendence. And I think one of the problems we have, and this goes to your polarization chapter, is we have severed those. And the left says we're so finite and we're so subject to fate and we need compassion. And they're right. But the right says, but when they're both at their best, because neither one of them is at their best right now. They're at their worst right now. So, but when they're at their best, and the right says, yes, but we're not just animals. We're persons called to responsibility. We have a relationship to the true, the good, and the beautiful. And then what you need is, like, a dialogical relationship between them for a healthy society. And of course, we've abandoned all that. We've polarized. We've changed that into each side is now at its worst, trying to kill the other and demonizing the other. But I'm trying to bring a lot of what you said into one thing. So I'm wondering if, because here's the thing, and I got to be careful here. So the research that we're doing right now seems to show something. Sorry, there's a long time, but I'm sort of building an argument.
I love it. Keep going.
Okay. So I thought awe is this, right? Opening up and everything. And so what you should see is if we induce awe experiences, and we have some reliable experimental techniques using the overview effect and music, and people can get sort of that awe, right? Then you should see increased measures of cognitive flexibility, because those indicate that people's minds are opening and they're exploring possibility. So we induce awe and we do all these tests and no measures of cognitive flexibility. What awe predicts is a confidence in any insight you might have. Now, that can be very dangerous, as you can imagine. But here's the proposal, which I've been making to my fellow researchers. The point isn't awe. The point is a humble sense of the transcendent. The point is reverence, and reverence is a virtue. And what the awe does is it gives you some confidence to start cultivating reverence. But you don't get the cognitive benefits from the experience of awe. You get the cognitive benefits from taking up the encouragement, I use that word very deeply, right? To cultivate a proper reverence.
What are you meaning by reverence in that context?
So what I mean by reverence is exactly that tonos, that creative tension. Sorry, I'm using a Greek word because our English word tension is only negative for people now. We forget Heraclitus, the tension of the bow, the tension of the lyre, the tension that holds the bridge together. Yeah, exactly. And so I think of reverence, and this is somewhat similar, but I think also different with is it Woodruff's or Woodward? The book on reverence is a forgotten virtue, but I think of reverence as a humble wonder that we get the profound sense of our finitude. That's the shrinking, but we are wondering. Not in the sense of curiosity. Curiosity is trying to get something. Wonder is calling things into question, including oneself. We get a humble wondering towards things. That's what I'm calling reverence. And that takes time and effort to cultivate because it's a virtue. It's not just an experience. That's what I'm arguing.
Okay, that's making sense to me. Yes, that does. So one of the things I reflect on a lot are these peak experiences, these ecstatic encounters that have been really defining in my spiritual life, but are not sufficient.
Exactly.
And it really, when I talk to, I'm sorry to bang on about this, but I've got lots of friends at the moment who are taking a lot of psychedelics, and I'm very interested in what it's doing to our spiritual landscape. And there are some similarities between the peak experiences they have on psychedelics and the peak, what I would call my experiences of the Holy Spirit. We don't know because they go beyond language and we can't actually compare them. Yeah. But, we at least can see in each other that something's happened, that it's big and it involves our bodies and our emotions as well as an idea. And I was talking to my friend Jules Evans about this recently. He's a psychedelic
I know
journalist.
Jules. I know Jules.
Yeah. And I was saying, I think, within Christianity, to be clear, the fact that I'm a charismatic Christian makes me quite a weirdo. There are lots of us, but it is not something that all Christians have, speak in tongues or have these ecstatic encounters. But I would say my flesh, or the bit of me that's foolish, just wants it to be about those, because those are amazing, right? They're super pleasurable.
Yeah.
Really connecting, really nourishing. But they are, and I think it was, who has the pyramid of needs? Maslow talks about them as
actually, by the way, that's a misattribution. Maslow doesn't have that pyramid. That was put in all the psychology textbooks and attributed to Maslow. Maslow is much closer to Aristotle than to that pyramid that misrepresents him in some significant way. Well, and by the way, beyond self-realization, Maslow had a final thing that doesn't show up on most pyramids. He had self-transcendence.
Yeah, so that's just making me feel better now, because that's the bit I quote. But so he's talking about the relationship between religion and these ecstatic experiences. And Maslow's fundamental understanding is that religion is these moments of encounter, and then around it accrue all these dogmas and these rules and these regulations that stop looking like real religion, which are these ecstatic experiences. And I'm like, no, Maslow. The peak experiences, I would say my experience with the Holy Spirit, my moments of encounter with God, should send me back into the rigorous spiritual path of trying to grow in faith, hope, and love, and love my neighbor. And if they are just some solipsistic self-actualization, that in my tradition is sort of worse than useless, because spiritual gifts are for other people. They are doggedly communal. We receive these things to make us better at loving each other. And so I sort of joke with Jules about charismatic Christianity as my set and setting. Like, I need a book to check it against. I need a community who are wise and know me and will be like, no, Liz, that thing that happened to you in that ecstatic experience does not sound like it is going to lead you towards love or fully aliveness. It sounds like foolishness. Also, you're getting a bit self-obsessed. And I need, frankly, to be repeatedly told that I'm mainly supposed to be feeding the poor, like not getting out of my head on divine love, much as I need that and want it. And temperamentally, it's where I would spend all my time.
I think that's right. I'm teaching a course right now on the nature and function of the self, and it's just wrapped up. And I had a student in there, and the work I was teaching and the work the student has done was coming together, converging on this idea that these peak experiences, they are, as you said, they're not sufficient. They're necessary. What they do is this is the term that's now emerging. They create epistemic vulnerability. They make you vulnerable to new ways of knowing, new possibilities of seeing and being. But if you don't have the setting, and I would add the sapiential framework, an ecology of practices oriented towards the cultivation of wisdom and virtue, that epistemic vulnerability can go. It has the potential to go in multiple.
You get the conspirituality, right? It makes you hugely vulnerable to abuse, gurus, cults.
Yes, that's right. And so, like you, I reject that idea. And Huxley has it to some degree, that if we could just peel away all of these doctrines and structures. Now, I have issues around reducing religio to credo. We can talk about that when we talk next. But I do agree with you that you need a practice and principles and philosophical in the wisdom cultivating sense framework that's homed in a community for these peak experiences to turn into transformative experiences that are transforming people towards wisdom and virtue. I think the evidence is mounting for that, by the way.
Yeah. Great.
This is a good place to end, I think. This has been truly full of wonderful in that sense. I've really enjoyed this. I hope that you found that you had enough, that I wasn't talking too much, that you found enough time to speak. Because I didn't want this to be an interview. I wanted this to be dialogos.
This is much more fun, a conversation.
Yeah. And yes, exactly. And sparking, insight and interest in each other, and asking interested questions rather than interesting questions, right? That's a distinction that my friend Christopher Master Pietro has brought into the dialogical practice. But I definitely want you to come back, and I hope we can continue and diving a little bit more. Maybe we can do a little bit more about the vices and the virtues, and a little bit more again about what we were talking about and what is the relationship between religio and credo, and how do we hold that relationship in the context of a lot of the things we seem to be resonating and converging on. That's what I propose for our next discussion.
Sounds brilliant.
So, Elizabeth, I always give my guests the last word. It can be cumulative, summative, provocative, elusive, whatever you want to say.
I'm so tempted to go nitwit, blubber. What is my last word? Think holding on to the fact that love is the really real. If you had to boil wisdom down to that, you wouldn't go far wrong.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I look forward to our next discussion.
Thank you so much for having me.